Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics, back with another creative grid tool video. We all know it's so much easier when someone can show us how a tool works versus getting a set of instruction and trying to work through it. That is me, and I think that's a lot of people. We recently filmed the log cabin trim tool video showing you what this tool was actually capable of doing. It makes 3 different blocks in the first installation of that series. We went through how to make the log cabin block that we all love so much. It's just so classic. And we showed you how, whether you want to do a 4-inch block, a 6-inch block, or 8-inch, how easy it is to do with this amazing trim tool. So this is just some scraps we grabbed. Maybe you have those. I bet you do. And I think scrappy quilts are a lot of fun. There's no kit for this, but this is a nice way to use up those strips that are just left over from projects. It happens every time. And it's almost like a walk down memory lane. It is for me when I have leftover strips from a specific quilt and I kind of collect them. And then I get a tool like this or some other creative grid tool and make a scrappy quilt. It means something to me, probably different than anybody else, right? Because I'm the one that made the other quilts, and these are the scraps that are now being repurposed to make something new, and that feels really good to use up our scraps. So in that first video, we showed you how to work your way through using the tool to make the log cabin block. And I promised that I would be back to show you what those other 2 purposes were and how to use the tool maybe a little bit differently to produce those blocks. So I'll put the log cabin one aside since I've already filmed that one. And if you didn't see that, go back and check that out. Now this is called actually a half log cabin, where instead of having the square in the middle and we kind of build around that, it's over in the corner. It's kind of very unique, actually, and this tool will take you there. And so here again, same trim tool, we have the 8, the 6, and the 4. So isn't that interesting? Same fabrics, but a very different visual presentation, and that will be in a separate video. The one that we'll be covering today is Courthouse Steps. This is a block that I'm familiar with. I've made it before. I've made it without the trim tool, and I've made it with, and I'll tell you what, I am signing up for the trim tool because it makes it foolproof. Even beginners can be successful on the very first go, and I love that. Your sewing does not need to be perfect. I love that because my sewing is rarely perfect, but with the trim up tool, it just makes us look like pro quilters, and I love that. So this is what the Courthouse Steps block looks like, again in the 4, 6, and 8, and we're going to go ahead and do the 8-inch version just because there's bigger pieces. It's easier for our overhead cameras to be able to capture that, but it's always nice to see the different sizes and you can decide what's the perfect size for you. So just like I mentioned in our first video when we were talking about how to make that traditional log cabin block, with your trim tool you'll be getting a set of instructions. Here's the great news. If you lose those, you can always go to creativegridusa.com. Just type in the name of the tool you're working with. In this case, this is going to be your log cabin trim tool, and you'll be able to once again download those instructions. The other thing that they have, there's something called a sewing and trimming sequence. This is how we recommend you cut your blocks, versus kind of willy-nilly cutting them into varying lengths. That can be a little chaotic, and I talked about that in the log cabin video, the first one that I did of this series of 3, and why the sewing and trimming sequence is a great way to go. As makers, we're used to cutting lengths of fabric to a very specific size, not just kind of willy-nilly and then trimming it up later. It is way more natural for us to cut precisely to that specific length. You can absolutely follow the instructions where it's varying lengths, but if you want to kind of, number one, have a more predictable and precise look as you're piecing your things together, I go by the sewing and trimming sequence. So the first thing, once you click on that PDF download, and you'll be able to print this, is notice this first one is the traditional log cabin. That's not us today. We did that the first time around. So instead, you're at the courthouse steps. You might even, because I have done this before, where I started here and maybe drifted up there, and next thing I know, I had chaos. I was cutting pieces to the wrong size. If you feel confident, you're going to keep your eyes on this one, great. You might even want to fold that paper in half so that we're just looking at the sizes we're going to be using. Down here, there's a square and a square finish that is yet even a different block. But here we're going to be doing courthouse steps. And this is having us cut first and second light, first and second dark. Of course, in this instance, this is our light every time. We use the same cute polka dot print from Riley Blake, but notice we kept varying our red. So that's where you get to decide what's your, quote, light fabrics, what are your dark fabrics, and you'll be cutting these accordingly, depending on, according to that sewing and trimming sequence. So it's very straightforward here that we start off with, and even tells us your center square is 2.5 inches. Maybe you have a mini charm or some mini charm squares left over or a jelly roll strip. You could just cut that and now have your 2.5 inch as your center. Or maybe you do the whole thing with some leftover jelly roll strips that you've maybe cut down. So our first step is, of course, to have our center cut. We've precisely cut these to the size here listed. These are considered our first and second lights, and they are 1 3/4 by 2.5, right? Sewing a 1/4 inch, sewing a 1/4 inch, and we're always going to be pressing away. That's the first thing that we're going to be doing. Then we can be putting our side fabrics on in any arrangement we'd like. And of course, we're going to pretend these are sewn together, right side together, 1/4 inch, till we have this, did our magic sewing. And notice how we just keep pressing away from the center, just like we did with our log cabin block. Now we're ready for the first function of using the trim tool, because remember, this is why there's so much grace in this. We're always oversizing and trimming up. That's what makes this so precise. You can do this trimming without a spinning mat, but if you're going to be using the trim up tools, I highly recommend using a spinning mat every time. I don't have to lift my project. I simply get to spin around that, and it also ensures I'm cutting in a more natural orientation, not cutting across or cutting dangerously back toward myself. So looking at the tool, this says log cabin or courthouse step round 1 centering square. It's very intuitive. As we place this on top, we can see all kinds of alignment aids. Of course, the square around the center square. Notice the dashed lines are going right along our seam, and it exposes the right side and the top. So we will do this, and instead of doing this, which is not very natural, certainly have done that, we're going to take advantage of this mat, and we're going to rotate this one more time. We now know that the left side and the bottom have been trimmed. Simply take your tool, rotate it 180 degrees. Once again, we're going to place our frame around our center square, exposing the right side and the top. I have not moved my fabric. All I did was move the tool. This just ensures less touching of the block, which is a good thing. And now you have completed that very first round. And we're ready to now move on. And once again, with our next fabrics, right side together, choose whichever side, right side together, or it's pressing to the outside until we have this. And let's just look at the trim function. Here it's going to be just as you expect, round 1, round 2. This is just a dream. It's so easy. This is why beginners can absolutely be successful, boom, on the first go. Once again, we'll trim, rotate our mat, rotate it again. I'm just going to move my block so I'm out of the way. Round 2. Place that around. I'm double checking. Here, here, here. And press down on the back side of these trim tools. I don't know if you can see it. These are grips that when I push down on the tool, this is not going anywhere. Let me just turn that over and kind of like, you hear that? That's the grip. If I don't push down on the tool, it moves. If I push down, I cannot move that tool. Incredible technology. There's a lot of tools out there that kind of try to be creative grid-esque. Number one, I just don't think there's a better engineered tool, but many of them do not have that grip. And you end up sliding and making a miscut. So there's a lot of value and thought put into these tools to help them be stable so that we can make good, clean cuts, because we're pushing against the tool and we don't want anything sliding. As you would expect, here comes our final round. Top and bottom, left and right, choose wherever. Maybe I want this one over here, however you want to do it. Actually, no, I would not put those next to each other, right? Both kind of ginghams and plaids. Press to the outside, and let's do that final trim, which is a lot of fun because, as you would expect, round 3, we get to trim around the entire block in one fell swoop. It's not kind of 2 parts, it's all in one. So I'm framing my center. I see alignment lines. I'm going to press. And look at that. Incredible. Just incredible. So you can see that this is so doable. So thank you for giving me a part of your day to show you just the magic of these log cabin trim tools. And I will be back on the 3rd and final part of this series showing you how to make the half log cabin. And this one is actually quite different than the first 2. It's not as obvious, so you're going to want to be sure to join me for that final video. Thanks again.